Legacy characters have always had a weird spot despite a concept as old as the turn of the Silver Age. Legacy characters have had a contentious history to say the least. Every time a character does don the mantle, no matter who it is, there's someone who will groan and kick their feet. The thing about legacy characters is that the concept alone is almost antithetical to the two rules of comics: actually letting change stick and fans accepting that change. For a legacy character to actually work, you have to let them have the room to breathe, form their own stories past their mantle shadows to truly set them apart from just the name. But considering the breakneck speed of Marvel publishing of, if you don't sell absolute Batman numbers, we're cutting you off after 10 issues, it's hard to set any of the previously mentioned groundwork when you're only working with a handful of issues. I've heard from many a comic fan that legacy characters are more detrimental than good. They take away from already established characters rather than doing anything original. But when done right, legacy characters not only open up avenues to unique stories, but also give new perspectives a platform to be explored that wouldn't normally be given the chance. I mean, just look at the most popular legacy characters such as Wally West and Jon Stewart. And hell, I could say Johnny Storm. He did take the name from the original Human Torch, all of which kind of trumps the originals in popularity. I love Barry, but sometimes I swear, whenever writers have to write the guy, they basically just reheat Wally West's nachos, 9 times out of 10, coming full circle from just being Flash's sidekick to setting the standard everyone else follows. Then look at Johnny Storm. It speaks volumes that he was able to get away with basically taking the name of the guy who killed Adolf Hitler without hearing a single peep of stolen valor. But then there's the opposite end of the spectrum. Characters who make such a weak splash, they either fall into obscurity or are only remembered for being truly redundant. That's what I want to talk about today. What happens when a pill is so bitter that no matter how many layers of iconography you wrap it in, no one, and I truly mean no one, will ever swallow it. These are the most forgettable legacy characters of all time. What's interesting is that the Punisher is no stranger to legacy characters. It makes sense considering the fact that all you have to do is be a madman with a gun and a grievance, making the barrier to entry pretty forgiving. Characters such as Lady Punisher, Rachel Cole, the original character played by Jon Bernthal. Now, all of these people have one thing in common. They have a fondness for firearms. But what if there was a Punisher who didn't use firearms or use that symbol that every estranged uncle with a DUI knows well enough? You would get yourself Joe Garrison. Introduced in Punisher Volume 14, a former S.H.I.E.L.D. agent who, after the death of his family and after the system he fought to protect for his entire life failed him, takes matters into his own hands, wanting vengeance no matter the cost. Unless the cost is a couple of bullet casings, because our main man here spec'd into energy weapons, preferring them over traditional weapons, but as well adorning a totally unique new symbol, nothing like the Punisher's skull until he gets mistaken for the Punisher and just kind of goes with it. Now, if we just take a little gander over at the date, and yep, it was made in 2023. This was the peak of the Punisher skull being co-opted by law enforcement, military, and people who hate buckling their seatbelts. The idea that people who were in place to protect and serve the public identifying with a guy whose main thing is not that and gunning down any criminals in a 20-mile radius was a troubling notion. Outrage got to such a point that even co-creator Conway came out and denounced anyone in law enforcement using the skull and actively tried to reclaim the logo by starting his own fundraising campaign and would platform many young black talent during said campaign. By 2023, Marvel was essentially put in a damn if you do, damn if you don't scenario. They could either make a statement similar to Conway's, denounce the usage of it like they've done in the past, but the problem is that it just kind of fell on deaf ears. Or they can go on continuing publishing stories without saying anything. Now, they don't call it the House of Ideas for nothing, because they somehow managed to come up with the worst one, as by creating an entirely new character to replace Frank Castle not only alienates your readership, but also is a gesture that completely does nothing, because the people who use the logo probably didn't really read it. They're going to keep using the symbol that you willfully surrendered to them by refusing to use it for so long. From concept alone, Joe Garrison fails, and even worse, the execution is so boring it's never able to move past the whole great value Punisher even in name. This is the reason we haven't seen the guy in years, and with no plans of returning, I couldn't be happier we've moved past this era of not getting anything Frank Castle related. The Sentry, a character entrenched with meta commentary about the medium, would be no stranger to the idea of legacy. Guy's shtick is the lack of one, and he does have the likes of sidekicks and even a superpowered pet with Watchdog. But the idea of the Sentry in the Void are inherently linked so deeply with Bob's character, and is used specifically to analyze him within the narrative itself. How do you go about actually having someone take up the name the Sentry? I think it is possible. I'll go as far as to say that the idea is a neat one. You see, after the death of the Sentry, the powers that was the Sentry were so immense, not even death could stop it. The presence that was the Sentry would reemerge throughout the world, and everyday people would start getting visions, memories of a life that they never lived, but it felt as if they did. Those memories were, of course, from the Sentry. But not just that, these visions were accompanied with the power of 1,000 exploding suns. That this isn't just one Sentry, but multiple now. I think the concept lends itself to explore the meta side of legacy characters, where these people who've lived entirely different lives simply have not just the mantle thrown upon them, but all the baggage that comes with it. We can see how that messes with their own identities and sense of self, being overpowered by Reynolds' own. In a similar way to how many legacy characters in comics have had their entire identity upheld and only known for the mantle itself. We could also see a moral struggle within Rob using these vessels to commit acts of good, but at the same time seemingly strip these people away of their agency and force them into the role of a hero. You could make it a really cool anthology series to explore this concept, even after his death. Which is the problem. You see, I keep mentioning that the Sentry died. And how did that happen? Well, during Jeff Lemire's run on the Sentry, Rob realizes that by running away from the Void, he can never find peace. So by merging with him to create an even stronger being that didn't walk down paths of good or evil, but his own. As he reluctantly kills his old sidekick, Billy, take down the Avengers with ease, he looks at his old home and flies off into the stars. The Avengers can only hope that the Sentry will still be on their side when he returns. Then he died, because Donny Cates used an old Sentry entry from an outdated guidebook as his source and threw him at Null, which didn't really go over well at all. My problem isn't that the Sentry died. God knows that's the only way the guy is gonna get some rest, but everything surrounding not only this death, but by extension the idea of someone else taking the mantle by just casually tossing away the work Jeff Lemire did makes everything going forward a little harder to actually stomach. You'll need perfect execution to actually justify this death and the entire next run's existence. Does it? No. The run has only 5 issues to establish any of these ideas, but the book is more preoccupied meandering around the idea of random people getting superpowers, and none of them get properly fleshed out before being killed off by the book's villain, Ryan, who just kind of feels like every dime a dozen evil Superman pastiche, which sucks because the Sentry never fell victim to such a trope before, and was more of a tragic figure if anything. But Ryan's biggest flaw is that he's just boring. He does nothing and shows us nothing besides, yeah, I'm evil. So what? I think a more interesting approach would be to use Billy, as he already had a connection to the Sentry. I know he died in the previous run, but stay with me. But I think there would be an added layer of tragedy to Billy seeing all these faux Sentries pop up in the wake of his idol's death, seemingly leaving him behind. The only character that attempts to be interesting is Solaris, who was a woman with cerebral palsy who gained the Sentry's powers and acts as our book's protagonist. But again, the keyword is attempt, because the book doesn't actually flesh her out at all to actually make me, or really any writer, want to use her. Even the creator of the Sentry, Paul Jenkins, couldn't care for her enough to even use her in the following Sentry book 3 years after her introduction, and Bob himself would return, closing that forgettable 7-year-long chapter in the Sentry's history. Now, this one is a little weird, I know, because I'm talking about Tony Stark himself. You might say, but Goblin, how can you say that Tony Stark is a legacy character when he's the original? During the glorious 90s, there was an event called The Crossing where the Avengers stumbled upon a conspiracy that revealed their founding member, Iron Man, was secretly a villain working with the notorious King the Conqueror. So in a desperate ploy to bring back their friend, they go back in time to find a 19-year-old Tony and bring him into the present. Soon after the demise of the original Tony, Teen Tony would become the main Iron Man. For all intents and purposes, Teen Tony was a legacy character. He was created to make Iron Man seem more hip and cool while replacing the original. And everyone hated it. In fact, the change was so controversial, Len Kaminski, the writer for Iron Man at the time, would outright beg editorial to not go through with the change, and when they did, he walked out, saying he would not want to be remembered as the guy who made Iron Man suck. And I don't blame him. His entire run right before this placed Tony as this complicated figure, believing that technology was the greatest gift humanity ever received. He saw technology as a victim abused by villains and blamed himself constantly for not being strong enough to stop it. So having him go, I'm working with Kang now, is not only a slap in the face to readers, but creatives as a whole. They knew this because a year later, in '96, Teen Tony would die to Onslaught, and during Kurt Busiek's Avengers run, most of the Crossing would outright be retconned to being a lapse of judgment over the course of a couple months rather than a multi-year long scheme. Now, while many legacy characters come and go without much of a splash, Teen Tony did make a splash, despite his year-long tenure as the character. I would say that splash irreversibly set back Tony's character, and Iron Man comics could never fully recover. No matter how many times you can retcon it, the characterization of Tony would be forever screwed. While there have been good Iron Man comics ever since The Crossing, even great ones, writers didn't know what to do with the character, and he would be all over the place. On one end, you had Mark Millar leaning into this moral gray side during Civil War, or you had the opposite end, where after the MCU really took off, he was barely recognizable and was more RDJ than Stark. Now, you might notice that I didn't really talk about DC at all in this video. That's because I think in general, DC, despite all its flaws, have had a better track record with its legacy characters. Now, not to say there haven't been bad ones in the past. I think characters like Jon Stewart, Wally West, and Black Canary have been characters who have not just been able to establish their own history, but also expand on the mantle itself. While Marvel, especially today, where the best you can hope for is a 5-issue mini and maybe a mention in an event that's hopefully not your ultimate demise, makes it a little hard to do that. But if you forced my hand and wanted me to actually say what I think is a bad legacy character from DC,